The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 96. Student Council President Election 9. Walking the Path. For some reason, the shape of the road differs from person to person. Perhaps it's true that nothing in this world is ever truly fair. To some, the path is peaceful and smooth, reminiscent of a forest trail perfect for a pleasant outing. The scent of blooming daffodils drifts in the air, and occasionally one exchanges greetings with passers-by like squirrels or deer, humming along to the chirping of birds, until a rock jutting on the roadside catches one's foot. Then, nursing a throbbing toe, they retell their story, how their life too had trials, was hard, but they overcame. They overcame, thus they succeeded. So, what of the road ahead for Clevius? The path he treads reeks of blood and decay, teeming with packs of ravenous wolves. There are no flowers on the wayside, only the stench of sewage. The sun had long been obscured by dark clouds, leaving a dense darkness to cling to the outstretched road. Tripping over rocks became so routine that taking one's shoes off would reveal nothing but calluses. Sprinting every day seems futile. It's evident that before even reaching the end, one would collapse miserably on the road. Thus, the boy doesn't run at all. Once there was a time, he indeed tried to sprint with all his might. Most of those attempts are now a history marred with failures. Sigh. The first action of Clevius, who was obstructing the path in the pouring rain, was to stab himself in the shoulder. Fwalk. Wish. Fresh blood cascades from his already blood-stained body. The pain is unbearable, but after clenching his teeth for only a short while, Clevius stumbles to his feet, the red glow in his eyes piercing through the sodden fringe of his hair. Elvira swallowed dryly at the sight so chilling to behold. The bloodsword technique, a forbidden art of the Nortondale family, never taught to anyone. Clevius, born with the fate of a sword demon, never received this teaching from others, he awoke it on his own. The strength drained from his body gives him the appearance of a living corpse. The blood flowing around him ignites with magic power and sticks to the blade. Only the result of his feet stamping the ground remained. Now Clevius had vanished, and only the shattered marble floor betrayed his path due to the powerful impact. One must put aside moral rules that dictate against murder. If you don't approach with the intent to kill, you can't even face the enemy. Clevius, who sprung forth like a compressed spring, already had his sword aimed at Lucis' throat. Clang. Of course, the sword didn't complete its thrust. The blade that touched Lucis' neck was immovable as if it had met an enormous iron wall. Basic, defensive magic. Despite its name, the power behind Lucis' magic made it as solid as a colossal iron barrier. Lucy casually swung her arm, as if swatting an annoying insect, sending Clevius flying once again. As he crashed on a corner of the rose garden gazebo, he immediately kicked off the ground, not even giving the impact time to dissipate. Clevius's piercing glare accurately caught Lucis' magic. Her combat style was to overwhelm her enemies with her sheer force, simple and clear. If Clevius could grasp her pattern, his agility exceeding human limits would allow him to dodge. However, Lucis' magical patterns are too diverse to be fully comprehended. She doesn't use them simply because they are too bothersome. The heirloom of Ed, a giant bow, floats in the air. Engraved with various intermediate and high-level magic, dozens of magic arrows are loaded. Clevius, sensing the flow of magic in that direction, twisted his body with superhuman reflexes but couldn't avoid being struck by dozens of arrows engraved with the intermediate fire magic, Pillar of Fire. Qua. Whoosh. Dozens of pillars of fire erupt majestically even amidst the rainy weather and swiftly swallow up Clevius. Cough. Ha. Luckily, he rolled away before the spells took full effect and managed to escape to the outskirts of the rose garden. Clevius yanked the debilitating magic arrows from his left shoulder and thigh. The extracted magic arrows dissipated into the air, but the damage remained conclusively etched. Clevius's body became further drenched in his own blood. Yet the bloodsword technique turns even one's spilled blood into a new source of magical power, making the forbidden art even more taboo. As wounds accumulate and the body becomes coated with blood, the power enveloping the blade and the body expands tremendously. Nevertheless, even with the bloodsword technique at its peak, it would never compare to Lucis' overwhelming magical power. Whoosh. Lucy raises her diminutive hand palm up. It looks so frail that it could snap at a touch. Yet, it's the necks of those who let their guard down before her that will be snapped. With a mere clench of her hand, a surge of surrounding magic coalesces into one point. Boom! The intermediate fire magic, point-blank explosion, hits Clevius squarely, sending him flying as he spits blood. Then the high-level lightning magic, heavenly punishment, crashes down upon him. Boom! Crack! It's lightning in its purest form, except infused with the vast power of Lucis magic. Clevius, barely regaining consciousness, assumes a defensive stance, but the attack is far beyond any feasible defense. Though he manages to divert the attack partially, the cumulative damage had long exceeded his limits. For Lucy to execute such magic against an opponent is the highest honor she could bestow. Most students are not even worth Lucy Mayriel spending the effort to optimize her magical efficiency with elemental magic. Most would perish instantly to the high-level magic she wields. Yet Lucy sensed it deep within, this adversary wouldn't fall to such attacks. Clevius rises through the swirling smoke, his uniform tattered like rags and his body so injured that uninjured spots are hard to find, but he pays it no mind. His movements are too fast for the eye. Only the debris kicked up in his wake hints at his whereabouts. Clang! When Lucy turns and extends her hand, thinking to have located him, Clevius's sword is already at the end of her reach. But a giant defensive magic circle rises between them. Screech, screech. The trembling sword blade. Clevius's body had reached its limit. Pressing the sword against the barrier, Clevius grits his teeth, pushing with force. With a crunchy sound of grinding teeth, cracks start to form in the barrier. Ragged face visible through the splitting defense, his visage is more covered in blood than skin. The blood, mixed with rain, streams down from his temples and forehead. Despite his body being a wreck, his eyes burn with undaunted spirit, as crimson as the rest of him. Clang! The defensive magic of Lucy breaks apart. It's a sight difficult to believe, even seen with one's own eyes. Lucis' hastily constructed defense could withstand even significant high-level magic. Bang! Crackle! Perhaps as a consequence, the blade in Clevius's hand snaps in half as well. Yet the remaining half is still sharp. Snap! Incredibly fast spell casting. 3 intermediate ice magic, ice spears, pierce his abdomen, but Clevius bites down hard, refusing to change his stance. The broken blade thrusts towards Lucis' forehead. Clang! Of course, it fails to penetrate her skin. Apart from the defensive circle, there's a separate, basic defense. Magic, enveloping Lucis' body. Moreover, the blessing of the storm activates periodically, making solo penetration an impossibility. Seriously, what the hell? Freak. Whir. Again thrown back by the blessing's force, Clevius rises to his feet. He grabs a sword dropped by a student trapped in a time prison nearby. The drawn weapon is sharp. Though his usual blade is broken, he wields the half with a reverse grip in his left hand for defense. He advances back into range with 2½ swords, not slowing despite the increase in wounds. Blood sprays with each movement, the bleeding accelerates, making the term, blood-soaked, an understatement for his condition. It's surprising just how much blood a human body can hold. Those who face Lucy all share a common image. It's akin to facing a towering Mount high with just a single sword. Is this what it feels like to stand before such an insurmountable force? Yet after being struck by several more magic bullets and intermediate wind magic, he falls, only to rise again through the thick dust like a zombie. Death itself was non-existent to him, he was the incarnation of a berserker besotted with bloodshed. One would think that the odds were so stacked against him that continuing the fight would be pointless, yet ignorance wasn't what drove him to rise once more. The memory of the day he stabbed his brother surged back into his mind. Despite the Clevius family being scorned as specters and looked down upon by their own clan, he had been the one who always acknowledged and supported Clevius until the very end. Lost in his rage, he had mutilated his brother, and by the time he regained his senses, his sword was already plunged into his sibling's solar plexus. As he gritted his teeth to endure the excruciating pain, his brother's dying words, still imprinted in his memory, were, "It's a relief it was me you killed and not someone else." How absurd those final words seemed, shed between the weeping bloodstreams. "At least I can forgive you. So don't carry too much guilt." The acclaimed swordsman who was rumored to herald the Nortendale family's second golden age had died such a futile death, with those parting words being all that he left behind. The rain strikes the world impartially. The dreary sky looked the same no matter where one looked up at it in Akan Island. As if the battle in the Rose Garden meant nothing, the grim sight of fluttering raindrops was the same everywhere, even outside the grand and opulent windows of the royal residence. Claire had just reported the anomaly at Ophelius Hall to Princess Phenia, who was gazing out the window at the rain. Shrouded in smoke, Clevius screamed with renewed fury and leapt forward. He gathered the remaining magic of his blood sword art to shatter Lucis' defensive circle, though it seemed to hold little importance. Lucis' reflexes also lay beyond the ordinary. Tipping her hat slightly forward, she dodged lightly and plunged a couple of wind blades into Clevius's flesh. A new stream of blood danced in the air. The rain fell just as impartially over the faculty quarters, occasionally startling people with thunderclaps. It was quite a downpour indeed. Assistant Professor Claire, sitting in the staff on duty room, frowned upon hearing the news from Ophelius Hall. Professor Flurbin had been out to the northern cliffs for an investigation. Looking out at the relentless rain, Assistant Professor Claire found herself momentarily lost in thought. The spray from the fountain in the faculty courtyard rose like mist. Clevius tumbled on the drenched ground before rising again. Crossing his two swords, he assumed a low stance and launched an attack that was too quick for the eye to see. A thunderous noise, that seemed too immense to be from a sword erupted, sending marble shards exploding outward from the center where Lucy stood, a high-level technique unique to the Nortendale family, almost like an explosion. Naturally, Lucy remained unscathed. The assault of rain against the windows of Ophelius Hall was relentless. The torrent tried to pry open the luxurious window frames. Having completely overpowered Wade, Zix escaped the corridor with Tanya. The hallways of Ophelius were near silent, devoid of people. If he could just get Tanya out of Ophelius Hall, he could prevent the situation from escalating further. With that thought, Zix quickly led Tanya toward the back exit. But at the end of the hallway, where the rain beat against the windows, stood a girl, still as a statue. He recognized her as a student from Ophelius Hall, still remaining despite the situation. Lortel Cahelm. The young merchant girl stood alone at the end of the corridor, not having sought refuge. Clevius's assault was far from over. With inhuman speed, he darted amid the debris of giant marble shards surrounding Lucy. Seizing his moment, he gathered all the magic of his blood sword art for a decisive blow. An ice spear struck his shoulder as he lunged, nearly overcoming him. Gritting his teeth, he used what remained of his broken sword to strike at Lucis' protective magical circle. Kagang. With a force beyond imagination, Lucis' barrier shattered once more. Yet the outcome exceeded expectations. Was it divine intervention, impressed by his relentless assault on Lucis' protective magic without a hint of fear for his life? Kong. Kagang. The sword in his right hand exploded into fragments, and he momentarily pierced through Lucis' defensive magic, however unlikely it seemed. Lucis' ability to sense magic was phenomenal, and reconstructing her defense system only required an instant. The duration, perhaps 1/100th of a second, or even less. But even a momentary lapse was more than enough time for a sword demon to plunge his blade. He had no proper weapons left, one shattered to pieces, the other half broken. Yet, against an adversary who, despite genius, possessed the physical capacity of just a young girl, on an incomplete strike, it could be fatal. Whoosh. Goo. AHK. Lucis' pupils shook violently. The moment had ended. Staggering back, she clutched at her shoulder. From her right deltoid across the center of her chest, the slender line of fresh blood widened, soaking her clothes with the crimson flow. Regrettably, that scene never unfolded. The difference was slight, but Lucis' defenses had prevailed. Asterisk. Pong. His last sword shattered. Clevius fell to the enchantment of a reflexively cast magic bullet. Damn. What a monster. Battered and embedded in the center of the rose garden, Clevius tried to push himself up, the blood caking his form, struggling to stand. But his body had long since reached its limits. His legs no longer obeyed him. Lucy paused, skimming her shoulder with confused eyes for a moment. The harrowing possibility of what could have happened loomed before her like an apparition. For a moment, she had truly faced the risk of being cut down. The perilous sensation of a blade's edge was not something that Lucy, who had lived a life among the strongest, could easily grow accustomed to. Regaining composure, Lucy looked down at Clevius once again. Yeek, yick, damn, hong. Clevius struggled to rise, but propping himself up with one arm was all he could manage. Unscathed, Lucy approached steadily, gathering magic in her hand as she stood over the defeated Clevius. Clevius finally allowed his body to relax. He had known how this confrontation would end. What wealth and glory compelled him to resist to such extremes was beyond even his understanding. He let everything go and closed his eyes. To have survived so disgracefully only to meet an end like this. How shameful and foolish until the very end. With that final thought, he managed to release it all. Whoosh, thump. The object that flew was an arrow. The arrow, made of magic, instantly created a vast pool of water, from which a mid-ranking water spirit, the ferocious lioness Lycia, leapt out, shielding Clevius and Lucy. Grunting fiercely, the appearance of the mid-ranking water spirit was intimidating. Confounded by the situation, Clevius and Elvira, who had barely regained consciousness in the corner, looked toward the direction from which the arrow came. At the entrance to the rain-soaked rose garden stood a man holding a bow similar to the one Lucy had, a large rope pulled deeply over his head, so worn and frayed that the edges were jagged. The sight, akin to a ghost resurrected from the dead, left no choice but to swallow dryly in apprehension. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 97. Student Council President Election 10. Silence pervaded the Ophelius Hall. Lortel Cahelm stood silently blocking the exit to the central corridor. Seeing him, Zix grabbed Tanya, who was running beside him, by the shoulder. What? Zix pulled Tanya toward himself and hid her behind his back. Guided by Zix's strong grip, Tanya stumbled before regaining control of her body. Why so sudden? Stay still. Zix's intuition was almost always spot on. His instincts, honed and sharpened in the wild, had saved him from crisis numerous times. This time was no different, as Zix's instinct screamed a warning. Whether she was merely resting or not, she donned a lace slip dress with a light yarn coat. Her abundant auburn hair, waving like the sea, was completely let down. Lortel. Zix was aware, to a certain extent, of Ed's social circle. Most who recognized Ed's true value became special to him, and despite a narrow circle, Ed's acquaintances were a formidable lot. Knowing that Lortel also had a particularly close relationship with Ed, Zix adjusted his stance cautiously. He held the sword handle but wanted to avoid combat with Lortel if possible. Lortel's magical proficiency and reflexes were so remarkable that even the strict Professor Glast had placed her name in Class A. However, when it came to real combat sense and instincts, she wasn't yet at a level to keep up with Zix. If they fought, Zix would likely win. It might be a disadvantage for Zix in a straightforward firefight, but in a one-on-one combat scenario, exploiting abilities and environment to their limits, few could best him. Yet, the true dread of Lortel did not stem from her combat skills. Once Lortel Cahelm set her sights on someone, she invariably led them to ruin. Even her adoptive father couldn't escape her clutches. One must never be deceived by her tender appearance and dignified speech, mistaking her for a kind and benevolent aristocrat. Zix Effelstein knew it all too well. She was a rose with thorns, envenomed enough to kill an elephant in moments. If one were to list those who must never be made enemies in the Sylvania Academy, she would effortlessly rank within the top 3. The figure silently waiting by the door did not seem friendly in any aspect. It's certain she has heard of Ed's death. Given the commotion Lucy has been causing outside, it would be stranger if she hadn't heard. Thus, Zix had no choice but to shield Tanya. We should evacuate, Lortel. As Zix suggested this, Lortel, hidden in the shadows, slowly lifted her head. The effect of Ed's death on her emotions, what thoughts she harbored towards Tanya, it was impossible to gauge. All Zix could do was silently wait for her response. Unexpectedly, Lortel lifted her head with an elegant smile. So, Zix, if you're speaking this way, what have you been doing here instead of escaping? Practiced tone as usual. The attire might be more casual and informal, but her composed demeanor was unchanged, which made Zix feel incongruity. Keeping his tension, Zix carefully watched Lortel, who proceeded calmly. "It's dangerous, we need to evacuate. Don't you think, Zix? And you too, Tanya." Even Tanya seemed to sense the abnormality, yet not appearing hostile, it was difficult to reply. "Lortel." Zix did not release his grip on the sword handle. And he asked to the point. "Have you heard about Senior Ed?" Lortel's brow twitched subtly. A reaction missed by most, but quick-witted Zix caught the emotional turbulence. "What do you think? Right, you won't just let us go. What are you saying, Zix? I have no reason to stop you." Lortel's eyes narrowed and she smiled placidly. "But Tanya." And Zix could not take a single step. "In a simple one-to-one combat, I couldn't possibly beat you, Zix." A long list of Lortel Caheln's abilities would leave anyone's mouth sore. But foremost, her unyielding composure in any situation could be considered her epitome of strength. Whether Tarkhan was smashing the student council building or a hair-trigger situation caused Professor Glast's magic tower to rise, she never panicked, never lost her rationality. She's a machine-like monster of reason, always finding and acting on the best approach. Even Lucy, always so aloof, was swept by rage in such a situation, while Lortel bit down and maintained her cold rationality. Nevertheless, reason and logic don't always go hand in hand. Although she lived a merchant's life, weighing everything against gold, even she occasionally strayed from the scales of rationale. That is, when Ed was involved. Lortel would not stand in Zix's way, because in combat, Zix was superior. So, it was hard not to wonder. If it weren't me, if it were just Tanya, what would have been your plan? Calm and orderly as she appeared, there was no certainty that her interior mirrored her exterior. The girl never honestly reveals her innermost thoughts. Therefore, no amount of disorder tainting her insides would ever be discerned from her exterior. But occasionally, a fleeting trace of her true sentiments surfaces. "I would have killed her." A chill ran up Tanya's spine. Her expression was still calm and orderly. Her tone had not changed. Yet, a sharp threat sliced through the atmosphere. "You're lucky, Tanya. You should be thankful Zix was with you." Tanya's expression vividly reflected in Lortel's amber eyes as she guarded the corridor, possibly. "That's reckless, Lortel." "True, Zix. It seems you're on Tanya's side." Zix couldn't argue. All evidence suggested Tanya was the culprit behind Ed's assassination. The conspiracy aligns with Tanya's consistently hostile behavior toward Ed. Coupled with the assailants who appeared to be agents of the Rothtaylor household, well known to directly serve Tanya, it's clear. Rarely do retainers act without their master's directives. Zix's decision to trust Tanya's innocence once more was led by emotion over reason. Based on his experiences, he surmised Ed wouldn't want Tanya to face a terrible fate. Lortel always preferred rational action, which is why she clashed terribly with the emotion-driven Zix. So, instead of killing her outright, you would have resorted to torture to extract a confession. It could be a different story, then. Zix swallowed dryly upon seeing Lortel's ever-smiling face. She was clearly not in a normal state. As calm as she looked on the outside, something twisted lurked within. "Your nails seem well maintained, Tanya." "Fortunate, indeed." Tanya shuddered, hastily concealing her hands behind her. The subtle threat in Lortel's words was laden with a chilling implication. Just the thought of her nails remaining intact was enough to send shivers down her spine. "No, I didn't. It's not true." "Stop, Tanya. She's not someone who can be swayed by emotional pleas." As Tanya attempted to protest, Zix stopped her calmly. Lortel's expression remained unchanged. Just quietly, she allowed them passage. "Proceed." Lortel never engages in a fight she can't win. She only chooses battles she's certain to triumph in. It's the dignity of someone who has weathered the stormy fronts of business from an early age. This was not Lortel Caheln's battlefield. Unlike a domain where swords clashed and magic flew, she operated in the shadows, seizing control of the battlefield itself. If turned into an enemy, a terrible fate was certain. In making Ed an enemy, it went without saying, Lortel would also become a foe. Although Tanya wasn't ignorant of this, the reality sending waves of fear flooding through her was overwhelming. Zix kept a wary eye on Lortel. She really didn't move an inch. Was she truly not planning to stop them? Or was this all still an act, a part of her scheme? It was indistinguishable. One might devise a way to outmaneuver an opponent with brute strength, look for an alternative compromise, or rely on sheer determination to win. But with someone as cunning as Lortel, any action taken was shrouded in doubt, like staggering through smoke, making her a truly headache-inducing adversary. As the standoff stretched on with no clear answer. Then, Lortel. Crashing noises. Ah, whoa, ah, be careful, are you hurt? I'm fine. But the window, oh no, it's all broken, this has got to be expensive, I don't have that kind of money, what am I going to do? You think someone's going to go around looking for the culprit and asking for damages because a window got broken right now? Closing square bracket. A girl who had smashed through a corridor window and slid inside caught everyone's eye. The sound of rain that was heard outside now echoed directly into the corridor. Her pink, braided hair was completely soaked, as were her clothes. The white blouse and blue skirt clung to her body, drenched by the rain. As she wrung out her wet skirt and shook her head like a puppy, she caught sight of Tanya and brightened. "Ah, I found you." Tanya. But as she shouted, suddenly aware of the corridor's atmosphere. Tanya was trembling, Zix was sweating, his hand poised over his sword, while Lortel watched coolly with icy eyes. Did I misread the situation? Yenica stopped squeezing the water from her collar. Merylda, who was peeking through the window, sighed. No, you came at just the right time, it seems. Closing square bracket. It wasn't something he had never done before. Once again, he had been defeated. Already accustomed to defeat, it was a taste too familiar. Kuhuk, irk. No matter how much he tried to push himself up from the ground, his body lost strength before even reaching halfway. He could only manage to lift his head, and as he looked up, he saw a man clad in a robe, looking down at him, Clevius. As soon as he stepped into the rose garden, he checked his surroundings, as if it would be troublesome if someone saw him. Regrettably, in the mostly evacuated rose garden, there wasn't anyone to witness him. Students or maids trapped in the time jail were irrelevant, and at most, there were only a few like Clevius or Elvira, who lay collapsed nearby. The pouring rain and the resulting mist made it difficult to recognize faces, even if there were signs of life. Lieutenant Water Spirit, Lioness Lycia, vanished in an instant, her form appearing unstable at first glance. It seemed she had been summoned with the last remnants of a strength that had reached its limits. As a result, only those left were Lucy, Elvira, Clevius, and the robed man. Looking up close, he was able to recognize that blonde youth wearing noble features, a familiar face. What the X? Clevius let out a hollow laugh, barely holding himself up with his trembling arms. You were still alive, you bastard. Ah, Kuhuk. Clevius, who spat a mouthful of blood, forcefully looked up at Ed. Really? You piece of, if I had known it would come to this, Kuhuk. You held up. Clevius. Yeah, why, are you being a jerk? Among the streaming rain, the ravaged boy, face drowning in pent-up resentment and frustration, couldn't help but let it all out. Being a jerk, fuck. No one said a word. Clevius's outburst was just his own insecurity. Nonetheless, Ed listened silently. There was a hint of surprise in Ed's gaze, though. Clevius had withstood, slothful Lucy, for nearly 10 minutes. How many in this academy could manage such a feat? Even Ed, well-versed in Clevius's combat abilities, could scarcely believe it. Yeah, I was really beaten like a dog, I know that. I'm ugly, stupid, and pathetic, I know that, better than anyone else. Clevius clenched his fists and teeth, trembling. I knew it, too. I knew all along that charging in was senseless. That no matter how much of a scene I made, staking my life, I'd never measure up. Yeah, that's why I wanted to run, but with my damn legs not moving, what do you expect me to do? In the eyes of the coward, the rose garden was filled with fools. How could such mortals possibly stop a monster? The only ones who tried were idiots and lunatics. Maids trapped in the time jail, their successors, the grade leaders who tried to hold the line, and even the girl alchemist who always grumbled at Clevius. These fools were the usual figures Clevius had grown tired of seeing throughout his life. Leaving them behind and fleeing to safety, he lived by declaring the impossible as such, without foolishly exposing himself to danger. Everyone wanted Clevius to behave this way. He had been taught it was the wise approach and he believed it, too. How many more would need to perish challenging the blood of a demon swordsman was something even he couldn't predict. One becomes accustomed to defeat, the pain and the blow to one's pride fade away until you can nod and agree with anyone who insults you as a coward, a runner. Or at least, that's what should have happened. How much longer do I have to keep running away like a piece of shit? The image of a hero, charging into a massive army with a sword drawn. The portrait of the Nortondale family founder, Belbrook Nortondale, seen in a picture book. Everyone feared and gave up on the curse of blood borne by the demon swordsman in Clevius's veins, except for his brother, who affirmed his ties to the Nortondale family until the end. The top students who trembled in terror at the mere thought of facing the high fire spirit Tarkon, and Ed Rothtaylor who came up with a strategy against all odds. Sword Saint Tylee who didn't lose hope, lunging towards Professor Glast among the rising towers of mana. The maids, the grade leaders, and even Elvira who tried to fulfill their duties in the face of the invading Lucy. Those imbeciles, their sense of defeat gnawing away deep within their hearts. Like a light shrouded in darkness, forcing one to face their pathetic, tarnished self. Anchoring feet to the ground, drawing swords that had lost their edge. Diving headfirst into trials deemed impossible by all, like fools. Really, I'm a stupid, pathetic, trash piece of shit, I know that. Clevius had lost too much blood. It was time to take a break. Unable to continue, he lost consciousness and collapsed. Ellipsis. Solitude is a disease that leads to death, a curse that slowly eats away at the heart, affecting everyone equally. People lean on each other because of this. Even for a girl who lives her life looking down on worldly matters with indifferent eyes, this deadly ailment is inevitable. Sadly, she couldn't understand the terror of solitude, for she had glucked during her youth. His presence, with his wrinkled hands gently stroking her hair, always there but also seemingly absent, guarded the girl from the terror of loneliness. However, such self-awareness is hard to come by. It's natural to only realize the pain once something is lost. The robed boy's figure that flashed into view made Lucy's knees nearly buckle. Rubbing her eyes in case it was a hallucination, the boy remained in sight. She didn't react dramatically. She wasn't the type to yell and charge into an embrace. Sorry about that, Lucy. I couldn't let you know in advance. There were reasons I had to pretend to be dead. But as that voice she thought she'd never hear again reached her ears, reality set in. The situation was critical, life and death, and there was no chance to prepare or send a word. As Ed approached Lucy, walking through the rain, he seemed uncertain until he faced her and firmly delivered the message. I'm alive. Here, like this. Lucy looked up at Ed blankly. His robust frame, his wet golden hair, even the scent of grass that clung to his body, they all confirmed it was indeed Ed Rothtaylor. Her expression didn't change, yet the large teardrops streaming down her face were clearly not rain. Then, without a word, she leapt and grasped Ed's chest, burying her face in the wet fabric of his clothes. I thought you had died, she mumbled through the dampness, her tone uncommonly soft for Lucy. Amidst the gentle rain, Ed wrapped his arms around her shoulders, holding her as she cried for a long time under the drizzly sky. Spring rain washes away what was, preparing the world to reveal something new. Just like the tides of emotions, vent openly, regain composure, and even the most stable relationships can take on a new phase, starting with a slight discomfort. Lucy, held in Ed's embrace, pouring her heart out, eventually grasped those delicate feelings hidden within her solitude. Even if she overlaid Gluck's face onto Ed's, the feelings she held for each were fundamentally different. The warm touch of Gluck's wrinkled, caring hands on her head, and Ed's pressing grip as he comforted her tearful breakdown, they were similar but also strangely distinct. As the rain slowly stopped and moonlight peeked through the clouds, Lucy, who had been snuggling into Ed's embrace, caught her breath. Realizing that difference doesn't take much once you're aware of it. Suddenly, Ed wobbled, catching his balance in surprise. Lucy, who had been crying in his arms, abruptly stopped her tears, pushed against his chest, and raised her head. Staring up at Ed with disbelief, both were equally astonished. Her eyes still glistened with tears, but her emotions were clear and honest. Like a cat startled by an unexpected predator, heat rushed to Lucy's face. Lucy. Ed called her name simply, but her heart felt ablaze. Unable to form words among her shaky breaths, Lucy stumbled backward. She who towered like Mount High, even the Academy's top sorcerers shook in her presence, now trembled before the unknown face of Ed. Her features brimmed with nothing but shock. Ed, to Lucy, represented an unimaginable change in the landscape of her world. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 98. Student Council Election Battle 11. Zix Effelstein always lived by his instincts. In the wild world where he could have died at any moment, it was not realistic or rational judgment, but primitive and instinctive intuition that had kept him alive. This was in stark contrast to Lortel, who had always lived within an orderly system, making rational decisions her whole life. That's why he often found himself at odds with her. He had lived through experiences that the flowers of the greenhouse could hardly imagine. Hiding and running from the predators of the prairies was almost a daily routine for him, feeling the threat of death every day was nothing special. Therefore, Zix didn't easily get scared or feel panic. But now, he couldn't help but swallow his dry saliva. An impending sense of crisis that he hadn't felt in a long time, fear that made his spine chill and breath quicken was creeping up on him. Ah, I'm going to catch a cold at this rate. Yenneker Failover's figure speedily approaching through the rain. And the chilling silence of Lortel blocking the exit. Zix Effelstein had an accurate grasp of Ed Rothtailor's relationships with people. Consequently, he could quickly understand situations. He knew that Lortel was already half out of her mind due to the news of Ed's death. Though he felt uneasy for not knowing her malicious intentions, in a one-on-one fight, Zix would never be inferior to Lortel. However, Yenneker Failover intervening was a variable that even Zix found chilling. After all, Ed Rothtailor must have saved a nation in his past life, for he was a man bizarrely blessed with women. Having many women following him was a testament to his abilities. In the wild world, it was not rare for a strong male to have several females. Whatever this meant in the civilized world, though, was a complex issue. Regardless, the current situation was an unfavorable variable. More than anything, Yenneker Failover was among those devoted to Ed. With Lortel already consumed by cold fury, emotional Yenneker Failover couldn't have been taking it well. At least in Zix's mind, there was no way Yenneker could stay silent after hearing of Ed's death. Thus, "I've been looking for you, Tanya." At those words from Yenneker, he had no choice but to gulp down saliva. Zix looked at Tanya with a side eye without relaxing his grip on the hilt of his sword. Tanya, trembling, was already cornered against the wall. There was something bone-chillingly frightening about the cold fury in Lortel. At least Yenneker seemed somewhat collected, contrary to expectations. Nonetheless, Tanya appeared to be terror-stricken by something unpleasant in her memory, tears brimming in her eyes. Zix imagined how terrified he would be in Tanya's place. It would feel like walking a tightrope above a chasm. Considering taking Tanya's side in this situation seemed reckless, but despite that, Zix decided to trust his instincts. Having observed Ed and Tanya, he had a growing conviction that Tanya wasn't directly responsible for Ed's murder. Facing both Yenneker and Lortel was too much even for Zix. He was a master of duels. His skills, experience, and innate fighting instincts were almost unmatched at the academy. But even he had weaknesses. His almost prophetic ability to anticipate and reflexes, his battle sense, all became ineffective in the face of overwhelming firepower. If the opponent was a dual subject, using swordsmanship and magic, Zix wouldn't lose, but against Yenneker, who commanded legions of spirits with mass and firepower, the matchup was simply unfavorable. "I have something to say about Ed." So, when Yenneker started the conversation, he reluctantly took the last resort he wanted to avoid. Huang. Zix's magic, quick as light, shattered a section of the corridor's wall. He didn't want to cause property damage, but in a situation as dire as this, he had no choice. Woa! Ah! Yenneker and Lortel stumbled in the sudden gust of wind and dust. Seizing the moment, Zix wrapped his arm around Tanya's waist and jumped through the broken outer wall. The rain had almost stopped. The remaining drizzle and the wind striking his entire body gave Tanya another surge of fear. Thud. Even wrapped in wind magic, the impact of the landing wasn't completely cushioned. After landing near the back door and steadying themselves, Zix put Tanya down. If they took the path behind Ophelius Hall and headed towards the west living area, they could find a place to hide. Zix straightened up and looked back at Ophelius Hall. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. A giant fire lizard clung to the outer wall, surrounded by numerous fluid spirits. There was also a wolf the size of a house peeking through the window, and it was easy to count the number of subordinate spirits in the hundreds. Controlling that many spirits at once was always an impressive sight. The spirits all looked like they were searching for someone. Undoubtedly, they were looking for Tanya Rothtaylor. She too seemed to have fully realized this. The trembling of her teeth intensified. Pull yourself together, Tanya Rothtaylor. Zix wiped the rainwater from his face several times and then spread his robe, draping it over Tanya. Follow this path behind and run. When you reach a fork, head west. Keep running like mad and you'll reach the living area. Once inside, hide in the town. The more complicated it is, the harder it is to find you. If you think you've shaken them off, find somewhere to ask for help. You're the heir to the Rothtaylor family, so it would be ideal to seek out someone from the royal power or a familiar noble family. Quote, being indebted to the heir of the Rothtaylor house could potentially give one political grounds or social standing. Tanya's life was in itself a good bargaining chip. But what will you do, Senior Zix? I'll hold them off as long as I can so they can't pursue you. It's impossible to subdue Yenica or Lortel, but I should be able to fend them off long enough and then escape on my own. Why go so far? If you weren't Ed's sister, I wouldn't have gone this far. Consider yourself lucky. Zix pulled out a magical tool from his pocket. It was a slate with 4 red orbs embedded in it. Helgo's winged shoes, a device that temporarily increased agility. Using a leather strap, Zix tied the magic tool around Tanya's waist. Then, grabbing her shoulder, he spun her around and pushed her back firmly. Pushed by the force, Tanya ran a few steps before stopping and looking back. Zix had already lost interest in her, instead focusing on Ophelius Hall, filled with spirits. Biting her lip, Tanya closed her eyes and sprinted into the path. Sigh. Zix drew a deep breath and drew his sword, checking the flow of magic with his other hand. Yenica's pursuit was slower than expected. Since the spirits had already detected the trail, pursuing them shouldn't be that difficult, the reason was unclear. Perhaps, he guessed, she was conversing with Lortel. It's not the time for banter when your target has just escaped in front of you. They weren't known to get along in the first place. However, Zix shook his head. What did it matter if they were rivals now? Both were consumed with the grief of vengeance. Dealing with both of them wasn't an easy task, but buying enough time for Tanya to escape and then making his own escape was entirely possible. Nevertheless, knowing this didn't stop the cold sweat. One spirit, Mage, revealed herself between the broken walls. She was completely drenched, with a few strands of hair sticking to her face, looking utterly pitiful. As she mounted a huge water hawk, the countless fluid spirits surrounding her descended to the ground behind her. The scene was like the arrival of a queen, holding a long oak stick at an angle and descending to the ground amidst her spirits. Zix took his battle stance and stared straight at her as she landed lightly on the stone pavement. Facing her, Zix clenched his teeth and shouted, "You won't listen now, no matter what I say, will you, Senior Yenica?" "I fully understand that sentiment." Straightening his sword, Zix spoke with determination. "However, convictions vary among people, and although all evidence may point to that girl as the culprit, I have decided to follow my intuition. If you don't understand, there's nothing I can do. That's my way of life. I've lived like that my whole life." But Zix did understand Yenica's feelings. He, too, had a beloved, Elka Islan. So Zix shouted with all sincerity, not casually dismissing her pain. "I know what it's like to love someone, too. Just the thought of the pain if I lost her is unbearable, I fully understand. If I lost her, I'd hate the whole world, the years lived would seem futile, and if given a chance for revenge, I'd burn with the flames of fury. It's inevitable." Because it's someone you love. You loved Ed more than anyone. What? Tragically, there was no way for Zix to realize he was the only one being so earnest. His position left no choice. It was a sad predicament indeed. Considering Yenika's perspective, who had figured out the full story, there was nothing that could flare her face redder than this narrative. Ed's already passed away, what's the use of choosing my words? I understand. How could I not understand how earnest and longing Yenika's feelings for Ed were? Why wouldn't I understand? No. Don't talk so loudly, so thunderously. The heartache might not easily heal, but love itself is valuable. Even if it's lost love, the passionate heart you held for Ed will remain. Screaming in absolute belief that she will become a part of Senior Yenika. Boom. Crash. The fire spirit's flames burst forth, and Zix was hit by the unexpected attack, falling to the ground. Even the most brutally evil forces would wait during moments of transformation or serious dialogue. It was never anticipated that the kind-hearted Yenika, in the midst of a heartfelt story, would be interrupted by such a sudden attack. If you were to speak for Yenika, she was already shaking in anger, her cheeks red and tears forming in her eyes, as she prodded Zix repeatedly with her staff. Ed isn't dead. Ed is not dead. So please, just stop. Sniffing the air, one could catch the comforting scent of fresh grass, a smell that would occasionally waft from the stack of hay in the corner of the cabin. Lucy didn't particularly dislike this fresh aroma and would roll around in the hay as she pleased. However, the maids at Ophelius Manor, insisting on maintaining a sense of class, would often spritz perfume on Lucy to mask the smell of the grass. Sometimes, while being carried in the arms of the maids, she would catch the delightful fragrance of freesia flowers, a luxury product pleasing even to Lucy's indifferent nose. Yet, she couldn't help thinking it unnecessary to go to such lengths to remove the scent of grass from her body. When she mentioned this, the maids had quite an answer for her. They claimed that with enough exposure, fragrances tend to settle on the body and transform into one's personal scent. The body of a person who frequently smokes would always carry the heavy aroma of tobacco. And a girl who grew up playing in peach orchards would always have the sweet scent of peaches flowing through her hair. Lucy tilted her head, but the maids were quite serious. They emphasized the importance of immediate response. Once a scent has settled on the body, it's quite difficult to alter it later. One should start addressing it just as the scent begins to take hold, allowing for gradual changes to personal scent. I've got a lot to do. First off, I need to gather everyone involved and explain things all at once. Time is of the essence, the Academy's people will be barging in soon. As I tried to understand why such a useless memory had come to mind, Ed spoke up, wiping his wet face. It wasn't anything grand, but just the sound of Ed's deep voice was enough to make Lucy feel like her spine was on fire. Unable to look him in the face, she pressed her hat down hard, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease in her overflowing heart. This feeling was new to her, hence, a natural reaction. There's a lot that's happened. I need to explain my situation. Not too much, to avoid complications, but, I will let Clevius and Elvira know. Tanya is being sought out by Yenika. Yeah, let's first get out of this rain and head inside. Finally managing to voice a question, Lucy asked tentatively. What did you say? So you weren't listening. Anyway, I've got my own reasons, so I'll explain and we'll go together. Let's gather and talk. And we need to agree on what we're going to say to deal with the aftermath. You're up against the disciplinary committee. And Clevius and Elvira got hurt pretty badly too, so you should apologize. Apologize. Yes, apologize. They got injured trying to stop you. It looks like Elvira lost almost all of her equipment for magical engineering, and Clevius bled like a fountain. But, it's not like Lucy wasn't without a response. Half out of her mind, Lucy had tried to suppress those blocking her path as gently as possible. Certainly, to those she confronted, even this may have felt harsh due to Lucy's overwhelming magical power. Nonetheless, there was no intention to harm Elvira and Clevius to such an extent. Lucy might not have been too thoughtful, but Elvira brought all her magical engineering tools and set them off wildly, and Clevius even stabbed himself in the pursuit of sword blood magic. Lucy was merely responding to their attack, but that was merely Lucy's perspective. No matter what anyone says, the fact that you're responsible for their injuries doesn't change. I didn't mean to either, but there's some fault involved, so I'll explain what happened with you. Let's go together later. No matter how trying to object, Lucy found her voice receding. Sighing at the sight of Ed's face brought the realization. His reaction was not significant or unusual, it was all too common for Ed. But to Lucy, it felt like thunder striking her heart. She felt despised and treated as pitiable by Ed Rothtaylor, and his disappointment burned her. Suddenly, as such thoughts flashed through her mind, Lucy's back felt like it was aflame. Lucy Mayrill, who would brazenly lie down anywhere, breathing as softly as a feather, sleeping through the afternoon, was not supposed to care about others' opinions or judgments. But choked by just one expression from Ed, she blurted out her response in a rush. "Okay, I'll apologize." "Oh, that's wise." Despite being a girl with formidable magical powers that could penetrate mountains and whose spells made even the most senior professors marvel, it was mystifying how a few words from Ed Rothtaylor held such significance. If Lucy came to the conclusion that these lingering emotions indeed stemmed from love, the question of why she developed such feelings in the first place nested in her mind like coiling smoke. She would come to regret recalling the past, as it incapacitated her thinking with a heart pounding like a hammer. Lucy had spent quite a lot of time with Ed. Initially, she wasn't wholly aware of it since Ed's camp was simply a spot for her afternoon naps. To her, Ed Rothtaylor was like a handyman roaming around the camp, so there seemed to be no reason for emotional ties. However, reflecting on her behavior over the past year, sneaking into Ed's cabin as if it were her home, napping on the bed he slept in, clinging to him while reading, stretching out on his lap, swinging her feet while carried to the wooden shelter, sitting against each other feeling the campfire's warmth, watching the starry sky, or having meals together by the fire, if the relationship had been between old Mage Gluck and young Lucy, its meaning would change completely. An old teacher and his young student, a grandfather and his granddaughter, a caretaker and his ward. Any such comparison might make sense. But if she hadn't felt any aversion or distance from such daily interactions, then she had gravely erred. When this dynamic involved Ed, and when translated into a male-female relationship, blood rushed to Lucy's head. The heat rising in her seemed to strike her brain, but there was nothing she could do about it now. The future may be mutable, but the immutable past is the world's law. They say the essence of responding to an acquired scent lies in the timely intervention. But lax and insensible Lucy could never have had the presence of mind to respond in such a timely manner. Perhaps a scent becomes embedded without one's awareness, so much so that, regrettably, affections do as well. Lucy was already too far gone. Without knowing when the change in her sentiments began, Ed's distinctive earthy aroma had already wafted through her hair, collar, and hat. Regardless of her late realization of this emotional anomaly, it was now impossible to turn it around, having missed all golden opportunities for an immediate response, losing the most vital period of intervention. Then, the remaining approach lay in finding a way to control the inferno that had begun to blister her heart over time. Apparently, you don't look hurt, which makes sense. Anyway, we don't have time, let's go inside. Distracted again, her breath hitched at the rush of emotions tumbling forward, the timing couldn't have been worse. No, it's, just as well. Yenika's had a hard time looking for Tanya. Now that we owe her, we'd better wrap things up quickly and offer some help. When the name Yenika Failover was mentioned, Lucy's actions became incomprehensible even to her. Quote. Ed, who had turned hastily to head towards Ophelius, found his sleeve fiercely gripped and pulled. Quote. Even Lucy herself was taken aback by her own actions. Only then did the girl begin to realize her possessiveness. Do we have to go right now? An already difficult conversation. Heaving breaths, Tanya stumbled through the woods and tripped over a rock, taking a harsh fall. She tumbled in the mud and finally got herself together. If I keep going this way, I'll reach the dormitory. Tears welling up as she shook off the mud, Tanya stood up, took a deep breath, and moved her legs again. First, I must find help, somewhere connected to the Rothtaylor household. Survival was the immediate concern. The first place that came to her mind was the royal lodging. The Rothtaler household has a deep connection to the royal family, having produced many prominent court officials, starting with household head Kreben Rothtaler, a close confidant of Emperor Chloral. Perhaps the imperial family would help. Even though they wouldn't let the debt stand, right now there was nowhere better to turn to. First, I have to keep moving, can't rest, surely, they are chasing me, I can't be caught, not really. It's sadly ironic, but nobody was actually chasing Tanya. And I have to clear the charges of murder against my brother. I must find out the truth. Heave. Yet tragically, she has already been cleared of the murder charge. I can't be caught no matter what. But cornered Tanya could not realize this. In the end, there was only one thing that could be said to help her. Just be strong, Tanya Rothtaler. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 99. Student Council President Election 12. I flicked the chess piece shaped like a horse's head with the tip of my index finger. It was a knight, symbolizing cavalry. Pressing down on the top of the upright piece, it began to tilt diagonally if pushed with some force. As my fingers kept tilting the piece at the brink of falling, it eventually did fall over with the sound of a click, rolling across the chessboard. And so, the knight fell in battle, a sacrificial pawn for a strategic exchange. Princess Phenia, who sat alone by the window manipulating the chess pieces, sighed softly. With a swift movement, she gathered her platinum blonde hair and tied it up only to let it cascade down once again as she let out a deep and exaggerated sigh. She was in a melancholic mood. The news brought to her by Captain Clare of the Royal Guard was the cause, a report on the death of Ed Rothtaler. Though the full details were not yet clear, preliminary investigations by the Academy suggested that his death was likely an assassination orchestrated by the Rothtaler family's own influence. How did things end up this way? Ed Rothtaler and she, perhaps the term, a relationship of love and hate, would be closest to describing it. Yet, even that wasn't quite accurate. To put it more precisely, it was Princess Phenia who owed an emotional debt to Ed Rothtaler. Upon hearing of his death, she couldn't help replaying their past encounters in her mind. Their first meeting had not been auspicious, and more often than not, they had been at odds. If she could ask the late Ed Rothtaler what he thought of her, he would likely recount them as uncomfortably incompatible, with her being a thorn in his side to no small degree. Yet, Princess Phenia was no ordinary individual, she was the sublime third princess of the Chloral Empire. Comparing her status to that of Ed Rothtaler, who was reduced to a commoner after his expulsion, would be an understatement, like comparing the heavens to the earth. For her to be wrought with grief over news of Ed Rothtaler's death seemed peculiar. What was their relationship in the end to cause such despondence? Nevertheless, for Princess Phenia, who always held doubts about the Rothtaler family, Ed's escape from that fence had its significance. He was certainly not someone who deserved such a futile death. Determined to resolve the tangled threads of their relationship, she had cancelled most of her pending engagements, even rushing through others, intent on finding time for a proper conversation with him. But now, that scheduled meeting was tomorrow, and the Rothtaler family did not wait for Princess Phenia. Crack. Suddenly, she heard the sound of teeth gritting, startlingly realizing it was her own. Sitting still by the window, not doing anything but fiddling with the chessboard, she looked no better than a defeated hunting dog. What are all the accolades and love from her people worth if she continuously fails to act on her own convictions? Every time Princess Phenia attempted to exercise her royal duties, nothing ever seemed to pan out as she intended. The love she received from the public was not because she actively wielded power or lobbied for influence, but simply because she didn't. Unlike her sisters, who contested the throne and pushed forward with their convictions despite public opinion, Phenia lacked the drive to assert her own authority. Political decisions are often double-edged swords. Gaining something invariably means losing something else, and more often than not, such decisions required sacrifices. She pictured Ed Rothtaler's figure overlapping with the fallen knight on the chessboard. Although their initial encounter was far from promising, Ed Rothtaler had slowly proven his worth. If he were alive, he might have been a remarkable individual, not just a pawn of his family's influence. Yet his death seemed all the more meaningless now. Opportunities had existed for Princess Phinia, to listen to him, to mend the rift between them, to swallow her pride and deepen their connection. A hectic schedule, petty pride, and repeatedly dashed confidence had barred her from pursuing them. Realizing this too late, she had frantically cleared her backlog of duties in preparation for their meeting. Still, the cruel edge of fate had been swifter. It was a failure beyond excuse, and she could never free herself from the burden of guilt. Turning to her desk, she saw an array of documents, all gathered in her ambition to become the student council president of the Sylvania Academy. It was a feeble power compared to that of the Chloral royal family, insignificant as a fingernail, but within the walls of Sylvania, it would have been her own sphere of influence, independent of royal backing. That was Princess Phinia's initial aspiration, not to end as a mere third princess, reliant on royal favor, but to carve her own position as president of the Sylvania Academy's student council. I should not seek to hold power. She murmured this realization softly, her eyes losing their spirit. Knock, knock. There was a knock at the door. She granted permission to enter, and the door slowly creaked open, revealing Captain Clare, accompanied by Tanya Rothtailor, soaked and muddied, panting heavily. The setting was the central hall of the Ophelius mansion. The rain had nearly stopped, and the stars could be glimpsed between the clouds. The situation had somewhat settled. The individuals frozen by Lucis' time imprisonment spell had been left as they were, as those aware of Ed's survival needed time to coordinate their story. The evacuated Ophelius mansion was now quiet. Although some students might have remained, none were visible. Even the junior maids who had been aiding in the evacuation seemed to have departed completely. It had been a swift development. Despite the lack of time for proper response, the elite staff had managed a 15-minute student evacuation, likely reporting the incident to the faculty wing. Good, everyone is here. The living quarters were not as close to the faculty wing as one might expect. If they were just receiving reports of the incident now, it would take at least 10 minutes to arrive even if they hurried. With time in short supply, it was crucial to convey the essentials quickly, but the state of those gathered was far from normal. First, Clevius was unconscious, propped up against a column with the help of Elvira. Elvira sat beside Clevius, silently observing, clearly exhausted and curious about the circumstances. Zix was meanwhile apologizing to Yenica in a corner, his demeanor uncharacteristic as he bowed profusely. Yenica's cheeks were flushed with anger as Zix seemed to have said something inappropriate. As for Lortel, they were in another corner, hands covering their face as if caught in their own drama. "What are you up to, Lortel?" After straightening his coat and recomposing himself, Lortel smiled widely at Ed. "I knew you would be okay, Senior Ed. Yeah, sorry to have worried you like that. No need. Worrying, I mean, if you think about it, it's obvious Senior Ed wouldn't die so easily. Remember you taught me that magical device pattern, the Delheim hourglass that helps preserve life was among them." Lortel added with a grin. "A merchant must always maintain composure and reason. Despite shocking news, it is essential not to lose one's cool mind." "Right, Zix." Zix, still sweating profusely next to Yenica, failed to respond at first. "Right, Zix. Right, Zix. Yes, Lortel has always been unflappable." Picking up on the silent pressure, Zix rubbed his face as he spoke. "It's difficult to tell, this bargaining style of a merchant, whether it's genuine or not." Ignoring Zix's puzzled look, Lortel calmly continued. "Do you really think I'd have considered such a thing could kill Senior Ed? There's such a thing as unnecessary worry. However." Lortel stood up, closing the distance, and then tugged sharply at Ed's collar, peering closely at his face. "Rational judgment doesn't always go as planned." With that, Lortel lowered his head with a broad smile. "Facing you like this in person, relief sets in. I guess I was worried after all." The weight of old concerns seemed to dissolve from the chest. Lortel let out deep sighs of relief. "It turns out you did make me worry, Senior Ed. And as there's no such thing as a free lunch, it seems only right that you compensate me for this anxiety." "What?" Just as Lortel was about to embrace him in the next moment, Ed quickly. "The moment I raised my head, there was a girl who squeezed through the crowd and pushed her way in." Seeing Lortel genuinely surprised was a rare occurrence indeed. She was always composed, most of her surprise nothing more than a facade. But this time, it was real. She was unmistakably flustered, if only momentarily. Lucy pushed Lortel away with a whoosh and thrust her arms forward, assuming a defensive stance. Her face full of discontent, she seemed to shout, "Don't come any closer." Lortel was left momentarily dumbfounded. Lucy Mayrill, after all, is the type of person who always looks half asleep, indifferent to the actions of others as she casually yawns. Yet here she was, desperately trying to keep Ed at bay, and a sense of unease began to awaken in the depths of Lortel's heart. Lucy, puffing out her cheeks while waving her arms about, was clearly a girl acting out of jealousy, her body reacting before her mind. She glared at Lortel with an intensity like she was about to devour her. But when her rear inadvertently brushed against Ed's body, she jolted from the unexpected contact as if shocked by electricity, quickly retreating. She was the girl who would cling to Ed whenever she could, chewing on jerky or sometimes even found sleeping on his stomach from sheer boredom. Now, blushing red over such trivial skin contact, her actions seemed unnaturally contrary to her usual demeanor. Quote. Not only Lortel but also Yenneker, who was continuously receiving apologies from Zix, felt the oddity of the situation. Lucy Mayrill didn't usually draw much attention from Yenneker and Lortel because of her aloof, ethereal demeanor, almost as if she existed on a higher plane, giving off an otherworldly vibe. Although wielding overwhelming magic that commanded everyone's awe, Lucy herself lacked any significant pride or drive in her actions, resembling more of a background character than a person. Could such a girl truly develop affection for someone, nurse feelings of love, and become self-conscious? It seemed so far from reality that both Yenneker and Lortel had unconsciously set aside any such notions about Lucy. However, Lortel, ever cautious and considering even the smallest of possibilities, was conscious of this potential, though she did not expect it to manifest so abruptly in reality. Lucy, you. Before Yenneker could say anything, Ed nonchalantly placed his hand atop Lucy's head. Then, as if it was the most natural thing, he pulled her to his side, softly pressing her against his shoulder to soothe her. To Ed, this level of contact was nothing extraordinary. Having grown accustomed to Lucy's clingy behavior, he didn't consider a slight shoulder pull or a snug side hug as anything particularly noteworthy. Yet, to Lucy at that moment, Ed's touch was a catastrophe. Unfortunately, she had just crossed a pivotal point in her perception of Ed Rothtaylor. Her awareness of Ed had been completely reconstructed, prompting her to consider the intricacies of male-female dynamics. But this was strictly Lucy's own predicament. For Ed, treating Lucy so casually was perfectly natural. Quote. Unable to utter a word, Lucy's face flushed with heat as if she was about to burst, regretting becoming so suddenly conscious of such intimate gestures. However, one's reaction must inevitably change with their perspective and position, that's human nature. Why are you like this, Lucy? Lortel is genuinely concerned, there's no need to be so suspicious. I understand you're on edge because your emotions have just settled down, but... As Ed spoke, heedless of Lucy's inner turmoil and only warning her against being too cautious around Lortel. Lucy paid no attention to his words. She simply sat, pulling her witch's hat over her eyes, regaining her composure. Thud. It was Yenneker who pulled Lucy away, distancing her from Ed. You're too close. Surely, such a reaction was absurd. Yenneker had frequently visited Ed's camp and seen Lucy and Ed cozied up together numerous times. Yet, she had never felt any sense of urgency due to Lucy's indifferent attitude, until now, when Lucy Mayrill seemed unmistakably peculiar. Thus, led by her intuition as a girl, she had acted. Embraced in Yenneker's arms, Lucy finally snapped to her senses. With a sharp shrill, she escaped Yenneker's embrace and confronted them assertively. Lortel's gaze upon her had turned cold. Ellipsis. Silence enveloped the space between Yenneker, Lortel, and Lucy in the mansion's entrance hall. This is... Zix, who had been watching them with arms crossed, gulped down his saliva. The scene before him was even more captivating than the gladiatorial matches they used to watch together in the Island mansion. And it wasn't from a distant seat but a front row view. just as Zix was about to settle into his spectator's spot with a, who? Elvira, who had been sitting quietly beside the fainted Clevius, broke the silence. Aren't we running out of time? Ellipsis. Indeed, the group had no time to waste. Despite Ed having survived, they could not yet announce this fact. They briefly explained the situational urgency. They had to apologize to Clevius and Elvira, find the runaway Tanya, prepare their testimonies for questioning by the Academy officials. And once all was settled, Ed had to leave immediately. Zix slapped his knee in disappointment, but he knew Elvira was right. That's right. We should quickly proceed with the conversation first, seniors. Clevius opened his eyes to find himself at the edge of the Ophelius mansion's entrance. His body still ached from the beating he received from Lucy. It seemed that he had been half-healed already, less of a medical treatment and more of a direct magical intervention. Propping himself up, he took in his surroundings and realized Elvira was sitting quietly behind him. What happened? He felt his body's wounds less severe and they had been attended to. Not by medicine or first aid supplies, but by direct magical healing. Fumbling with his shoulder, he found some of Elvira's long orange curls sticking to him. The situation suggested that he had spent quite some time lying with his head in Elvira's lap. What are you making such a fuss for, you silly Clevius? What's going on? Am I dead? Well, with that mess I made, it wouldn't be surprising if I died stupidly. Stop being so noisy, already. Just sit over there. I've heard everything, so I'll fill you in on the story. The rain had stopped completely. Under the night sky, a large, round moon claimed the heavens. Clouds had passed, leaving the sky void and clear, stars scattered across it like salt. Illuminated by their light, Clevius and Elvira sat quietly under the garden tree, looking up. You're just going to have to testify that you stopped Lucy. What? Me? How could I have possibly stopped that monster? Stop complaining. Everyone agreed to stick to that story, and I'll explain everything later. Elvira firmly gripped Clevius's hair, eliciting a painful squirm from him as she pulled him back down onto her lap. Just rest for now. But what are you doing? Complaining that the situation was not comfortable, Clevius tried to get up despite his injuries. Elvira, however, pushed his nose down firmly. It was unexpected when Lucy sincerely bowed her head in apology for smashing the magical apparatus and beating up Clevius. She was the one who provided him with emergency treatment. In addition, she had somehow secured a promissory note from the Elt Trading Company for compensation and confidentiality, claiming they were short on cash now but would generously compensate later. Lortel even stood as guarantor for this deal, which surprised Elvira. As for the personal circumstances of Ed Roththaler, who was hunted by his family, it wasn't incomprehensible to her. Elvira considered explaining all the intricate details, but decided that making sure Clevius was comfortable was the more immediate concern. After a few struggles, Clevius gave up against Elvira's insistent hands and lay still. In the ensuing silence, Clevius firmly pressed his hands against his eyes. Suddenly it strikes me, just starting over makes me think all this is pointless. Under the now clear sky, he looked up from Elvira's lap, biting his teeth as he spoke. Life really is a bitch. Clevius knew this all too well, experientially. Complaining before Elvira would only result in being scolded, as usual, to stop whining. However, Elvira merely smirked and continued to gaze up at the night sky with him. Elvira's life hadn't been smooth sailing either. As the troublesome Anise girl constantly meddled with by her sisters, a dropout from the Alchemy Society, and now the head of Sylvania Alchemy Department. She considered recounting her troubles but decided it would seem petty. So, she just quietly said, "You're right, Clevius." Before the Academy officials arrived, the two lay looking up at the stars for some time. The formerly looming clouds were nowhere in sight, leaving a clear sky that filled their view. The vast starry sea was far away, but the brilliance of its light was clear and certain to their eyes. The Extras Academy Survival Guide Chapter 100. The Academy's scholars gathered in Nail Hall, the largest of the three buildings constituting the student union. The scale of the disciplinary committee was quite sizable. According to the Academy's regulations, Headmaster Obel Forcius had to attend, but with his schedule packed due to dealing with numerous incidents centered around the faculty buildings, he was unable to join, and the vice principal, Rachel, presided as his representative. The committee's main agenda was to review disciplinary actions for Lucy Mayrill, who had damaged property in Ophelius Hall, causing a number of students to evacuate. All facts regarding the incident are now clear, concluded the senior professor of monstrology, Flerbin, who had been the highest-ranking faculty member on duty at the time of the incident. Vice Principal Rachel, wrapped in an alchemist's robe adorned with elaborate gold trim, sat at the head of the meeting table, listening intently to Flerbin's report. She was an elderly woman, nearly celebrating her 60th birthday. Though her experience and tenure surpassed Headmaster Obel, she sat as vice principal because her scholarly accomplishments and magical abilities fell short of his. Of course, she had no complaints since she was a staunch meritocrat. In her value system, it was only natural that the more capable person should hold a higher position. And there, sitting at the student section of the disciplinary board, was Lucy Mayrill, looking blankly into the void, a student second to none in ability. Top of her class and grade, she was none too modestly considered the top student of the entire academy. Even most professors had to bow to her formidable magical prowess. Lucy Mayrill was the pride and symbol of the Sylvania Academy and their trump card when engaging in power struggles with external organizations or other educational institutions. No student representative from any other institution could hope to compare with her. In a way, Lucy was a pillar upholding the external dignity of the Sylvania Academy. Expulsion can't even be considered. Upon reflection, her actions hardly warranted the severity of expulsion. Upon hearing the news of Ed Rothtailor's death, Lucy had lost her senses and rushed to Ophelius Hall to personally punish Tanya, accused of orchestrating the murder. In the process, she threatened numerous maids and students and even caused injuries to the combat department's top sophomore and the top student in alchemy. And then there was the property damage. Even though the damage to Ophelius Hall caused by underperforming students was more significant than initially thought, it was not without consequence. The external wall of the third-floor dormitory where Tanya's room was, the opposite corridor wall, a pillar at the entrance of Ophelius Hall, a little of the marble flooring in the rose garden, and one gazebo. Technically, the corridor wall was destroyed by Zix, and the entrance pillar was broken by Clevius in an attempt to restrain Lucy, but instead of getting into the specifics, they regarded it as a collective responsibility because it was all triggered by Lucis' intrusion. Considering the damaged facilities, it would take almost a week to repair, with significant costs involved, although minuscule compared to the previous half-demolition. However, if there were one aspect to consider leniently, it was that there had been no casualties. According to eyewitnesses, she tried to minimize injuries and, despite her aggressive behavior towards Tanya, it was uncertain if she actually would have killed her had they met. There may have been a sliver of rationality, and given that, a resolution through dialogue might have been possible. Furthermore, Lucy didn't flee after the incident. Instead, she sat quietly at the scene, waiting for the academy staff to investigate, a move almost akin to turning herself in. Additionally, Clevius and Elvira, the only injured parties, had written petitions showing understanding towards her emotionally unstable state. Taking all these circumstances into account, the committee could, if so inclined, end with just a light punishment provided the last mitigating factor was affirmed, that being, deep remorse for her wrongdoing. Quote. Rachel narrowed her eyes as she gazed at the student disciplinary seat. All Lucy revealed was an occasional blink and a vacant look, showing no sign of the penitence needed. Her disinterested eyes revealed nothing of her inner thoughts, making it hard to judge her true feelings. It was an awkward case for the disciplinary board. The Sylvania side hesitated to impose severe punishments like expulsion or suspension, especially since the academy had extensively exploited Lucis' reputation externally. The last thing they wanted was to tarnish their prized asset. Despite Lucis' frustrating demeanor, it was factual that Sylvania had been milking her name to the extreme, and Lucis' supreme treatment was not without conditions. Student Lucy. Yes. Her dull response was draining to listen to. This incident cannot be taken lightly. Ophelius Hall is one of the core facilities of Sylvania. Damaging its property and creating anxiety among the students can't just be overlooked by our committee. I'm truly remorseful. Are you now? It appeared Lucy had anticipated Rachel's thoughts, as conveyed by her confident response. Despite feeling uneasy about her attitude, Rachel had no choice but to proceed. Still, considering the seriousness of the incident, an appropriate punishment must be administered to student Lucy. I propose. Despite her irritation, Rachel decided on a punishment that wasn't too severe nor too mere. The revocation of your scholarship eligibility for this semester, loss of residency rights in Ophelius Hall, a 10-day suspension, a 70-day ban from student welfare facilities, and a 2-grade demotion in practical exam scores. This was a moderate penalty, not too harsh, yet not too light. Most of what Rachel listed didn't matter to Lucy. The scholarship was irrelevant. Her tuition for every semester until graduation was prepaid by the Gluck Scholarship Foundation as a proxy, per the will of the great Archmage Gluck, exempting it from being considered a scholarship, but rather a private use of Gluck's personal funds. Nor would the suspension or demotion have much impact. Even if she missed some classes or received slightly lower grades, it wouldn't jeopardize her position atop the class rankings. Lucy was not just a valedictorian, she was astonishingly ahead of Zix, the second-ranked student in the magic department. As for the student welfare facilities, she never used them anyway. Yes, I understand. The only significant consequence for her would be the inability to reside in Ophelius Hall for a semester. Then, Miss Lucy Mayrill, please confirm that you have no objections to the decided disciplinary actions by signing here. Wait. Suddenly, someone burst through the doors of Nail Hall, interrupting the proceedings with a yell. It was inconceivable for someone to enter this critical meeting so rudely. Were they ill-mannered? As Rachel looked towards the door in disbelief, she saw the leader of what was rumored to be Sylvania's most polite faction standing there, the new head maid of Ophelius Hall, Belle Meyer, one of the youngest of the Academy's true power holders, the elder staff. Her short hair, neatly trimmed maid uniform with the skirt twined like blooming flowers, and the headband adorned with a red rose were all sharply tailored. I'm Belle Meyer, manager of Ophelius Hall. I meant to attend as a witness, but due to the restoration schedule of the hall, I was not able to arrive on time. I sincerely apologize for that, she said as she bowed gracefully and then straightened up. Belle Meyer closed her eyes solemnly, but despite her calm demeanor, there was a sharp and nearly palpable anger. It felt as if her temples might burst out with tension. The first to react to her entrance was Lucy Mayrill. Heek. The normally indifferent Lucy finally showed a reaction, drawing Rachel's intrigued attention. It's unusual for an elder staff member to come all the way here. What brings you? With all due respect, I urge you to reconsider the disciplinary measures proposed against Miss Lucy. What? By this point, Lucy knew for sure, Belle Meyer was furious, understandably so. The maids of Ophelius Hall who'd attended to Lucy's whims had been inconvenienced and locked away in a time containment facility under her care, and it was natural for Belle to be upset. It was increasingly apparent that Belle Meyer sought to overturn the decision that was about to be signed off on. Lucy's punishment, though seemingly mild, could potentially lead to unforeseen repercussions, and both women were acutely aware of this. Having wreaked havoc on the Rose Garden, I am the maid who has served Miss Lucy since she was a freshman. I believe I know Miss Lucy better than anyone else. Yes, but I don't think such a punishment will truly lead Miss Lucy to reflect with all her heart. I suggest revising the disciplinary measures, in the following manner. After a graceful smile, the measures proposed by Belle Meyer were remarkable. She suggested scrapping all the unnecessary sanctions and settle for confinement for 30 days. 30 days of confinement, this hardly seems like a sufficient punishment for the issue at hand. Confinement is considered a lighter sentence than suspension. Amid the numerous proposed penalties, including a 10-day suspension, to simply condense it all into confinement seems preposterous. No matter the mitigating circumstances and the relatively minor scale of damages, something seemed amiss. However, upon hearing this proposal, Lucy's face began to turn pale. Belle then stated the reason. Sending Miss Lucy away from the Ophelius wing would not be a punishment but a reward, Vice Principal. If you truly wish for Miss Lucy to reflect sincerely, it's best to leave her under the supervision of the Ophelius wing maids. Belle strode forward to look over the resolution and shook her head fiercely. Moreover, confinement with restricted external access is far more suitable as a punishment for Miss Lucy than suspension. You needn't worry about enforcement. Our Ophelius wing maid staff will serve diligently and monitor her 24 hours a day. We will ensure thorough and clean handling so that she cannot step outside at all. Wait a moment, no. I'll sign the disciplinary document now. Give me the paper. Arbitrary suspension. Please, just suspend me. Lucy, who had been maintaining an indifferent demeanor, suddenly stood up, waving her arms frantically. She was sweating cold and looked so dizzied one might wonder if she was the same person. Startled by such a dramatic shift, Rachel reacted. So, if we take into account the housekeeper's opinion, we'll go with the 30 days of confinement. The academic body, after all, preferred to impose as light a penalty as possible on Lucy. Ah, no, I am truly reflecting. Please, anything but that. Here, Miss Lucy, please sign. Belle, wearing a bright smile, showed a document where she scratched out vital information with an ink pen and violently revised the penalty section to 30 days of confinement. Belle then took Lucy's wrist, had her sign the document, and the deed was as good as done, leaving no room for objection even if it was almost forced. Having completed the signing, Belle contentedly hugged Lucy. As Lucy was as light as a feather, there was no sense of weight at all. Belle, still smiling contently, spoke to Rachel with a refreshing voice. Thank you for incorporating our opinions. With that, we will commence the confinement starting today. My apologies for disturbing you amidst such distinguished company. Now, I shall take my leave. No, please, just reconsider. Celebrated a week in confinement and I felt like I was suffocating. A whole month of confinement, does this make any sense? With that, Belle carried Lucy towards the exit of the conference room. Yeah, bang. As the heavy conference room door closed with a thud, Lucy's screams were cut off abruptly. Lucy's physical strength wouldn't be any different from an ordinary girl if she didn't resort to magic, and she doesn't use magic against the maids. As a result, Lucy being dragged away had the appearance of a sacrificial lamb heading beyond the gates of hell, causing everyone to remain silent in place for a while. Quote. Shall we move on to the next agenda item? The eerie aura of Belle carrying away Lucy made Rachel shiver for a moment. Then let's discuss the upcoming Student Council President election scheduled for next week. So Lucy is under confinement for a while. It had been 2 days since the upheaval in the Ophelius wing. After resolving most of the day's issues, I had returned to my hideaway in the cave of the northern cliffs and settled in with some essentials for a hermit-like existence. It felt like another secret base had been established, quite different from the cabin in the middle of the northern forest or the library on the outskirts of the living quarters. Considering it was such a secluded place at the northernmost tip of Akan Island, there was no better place for reclusion. One would have to scale down the cliffs and land on a rocky area, then continue inward to find the natural cave, truly a remote spot not to be found without prior knowledge. On a campfire at the cave's entrance, an appetizing stew was bubbling away. Having completed all the cooking, Yenica closed the pot's lid after checking the seasoning. It was ready to be served after simmering a little while longer. Lucy will have a rough time. She's the type to go crazy if she can't wander outside. Yeah, it seems like the disciplinary committee didn't say much either, tried to stay quiet as much as possible. Not sure how they took it, though. The school probably didn't want to punish Lucy too severely. Despite the impact of Lucy's chaos, the actual damage wasn't too severe. Even considering that, the confinement is almost a miraculous clemency, yet, it was concerning that Lucy, of all people, was the subject. It was as if someone who was well aware of Lucy's wanderlust had taken their revenge. Oh well, probably not. I got up with some recovered strength and stretched my limbs. According to Yenica, she's been helping a lot, maybe so much that it's surprising. On the first day, she brought my basic essentials from the cabin and library, cooked meals with ingredients from the living quarters, and fetched class materials from the instructor's hall for me. I would have lived in dirt had it not been for her laundering my clothes. It got to the point where I even thought about paying her for her services. So, out of half guilt and half gratitude, when I asked if there was anything I could do in return, she vehemently refused, swinging her arms, really reaffirming the kindness of her character. Ta-da! Lost in these thoughts, Yenika cheerfully entered the cave's interior, bringing 2 bowls filled to the brim with stew. Although I should have been the one preparing the meal, she insisted on doing it herself, so I had to leave it all to her. This is a beef stew that I often made back home. It's a dish I'm really proud of. As she handed me a bowl, Yenika placed the other on her lap, hands on hips, chest proudly puffed out. I humored her with an admiring, ooh, and adjusted my posture to eat. Quote ellipsis quote. Quote ellipsis quote. Lately, I've noticed that when it's just me and Yenika, absolute silence can suddenly envelop us without warning. Although there is nothing awkward between us, neither of us can explain this strange silence that occasionally sets in. Let's eat. Yeah. For some reason, this prompted us both to reach out awkwardly for our spoons. As I took a few bites, I was genuinely impressed. The stew was indeed delicious. Even if it wasn't, I'd feel obliged to applaud based on the effort alone, but this dish proved genuinely tasty without any need for empty flattery. I was about to share my thoughts, expecting Yenika to be genuinely pleased, but it's truly good, Yenika. You're really a talented cook. Oh, really? Her reaction was shy and somewhat surprising, quite different from what I had expected. She blushed, looking down with her fingertips fidgeting, almost as if she was flustered. Then came yet another round of that strange silence. It's something my family used to make often, so. The conversation had stalled because it seemed she had bitten her tongue while eating the stew. Yenika frowned, touched the corner of her mouth, sighed, and continued eating. Speaking of family, we still haven't found Tanya. Quote ellipsis quote. Tanya had been missing since she fled from the Ophelius wing. After the situation subsided, Zix and Yenika tried to track her down but to no avail. There were hardly any witnesses due to the late hour. Tanya had not returned to the dormitory after the incident, and all her essentials were still in her room. Don't worry too much, Ed. She'll be fine. Yenika tried to comfort me with an awkward yet concerned look and took a few more bites of the stew. I laid my spoon down for a moment, lost in thought. Indeed, maintaining the status quo wasn't exactly desirable.